Here we are again. Let's see, what should we talk about? About the latest version of my theory that is basically a recurring dream. So, over the years, I've gotten these recurring dreams, and they end up, well, it's more like a story that's put together from dreams and like confirmed, or it's hard to explain. Basically, it's like imagine that you've got an entire story written in your head somewhere, and you've like, it was a story that you wrote when you were very young, and then you forget most of it, but it's still locked in your subconscious somewhere. So then you start dreaming about the story, and it turns out that like it feels like your life is leading towards that story that you had imagined years and years ago, and like everything is adding up to a set point, and that set point is being confirmed by things that are happening in your current version of existence. So this is also largely based on if you believe in like multiverse theory or multiple different versions of reality being possible. So I had this dream a long time ago, and it was basically, I guess you could even call it like a vision or something, but basically it's been a series of images that will pop up periodically, and I've translated them into, after lots and lots of time thinking and etc., that basically I need to pay attention to my surroundings, which is pretty obvious, and that in my surroundings I'll find answers that lead to this true version of reality. It's kind of hard to explain other than that. The dream that had spurred all of this once a long, long time ago was basically very hard for me to interpret in the moment, but after much time it has, from what I can understand, it's basically like having viewed all possible versions of my timeline from both the future and the past. If you were going to try and say, okay, 15,000 years from now, you're going to be the brain scan that people use to not only figure out time travel, but immortality and consciousness, reality as we know it. But your brain has to be the one to experience a very specific set of memories, so that when we go through these brain scans, we can find these, and these are going to be the unique perspectives on the world that we need for this particular key point that we use as a locus to base all of the other key points of perspective on. That's what the dream was. It basically manifested originally as like a conversation with myself. I guess it would be like Jung's version of the shadow, where it was a self-confrontation, and then I ended up running away from it for a good long stretch of a couple of years of my life, and then it reemerged recently, and I actually faced it, and things have been going exponentially better ever since. And it had only recently come back up in conversation very briefly because I had found a notebook of random scribblings from a long, long time ago, and it turns out that They made sense then, they made some sense now, and I believe that they're going to make even more sense in the future. It's funny because I have no real basis for believing any of this. I don't necessarily even believe any of this. But listening to these quote unquote truths that I had laid out before myself in the past end up leading me towards a better life for myself. Since I've been following these ideals, I've been getting better sleep, feeling physically better, maintaining relationships better. From my perspective, all of these things, I can't necessarily attest that this is what other people can see for me, but gotten a better job, maintaining good grades in school, and it's just this general feeling that I used to be in a place in my life where everything was chaotic, and I feel like if I'm not careful, things are going to go back that way. Then there's a minute break in the good, and something bad happens, and I feel sort of almost a rush of adrenaline, but not quite. It's kind of hard to explain, but basically it's like, yes, I'm vindicated. I'm vindicated that this is nothing can ever be that good, but it's such a small temporary break. Then I go back to things being great again, and I don't know really how to necessarily cope, because I was raised in a environment where you were meant to survive by challenging yourself. I didn't challenge myself as much as I could have, so I didn't grow as much as I probably should have then. So now I'm constantly trying to figure out how I can challenge myself further than where I am, so that I can be the best version of me that should be possible. But how do you challenge yourself in a world where the challenges laid before you are largely of your own creation? There is no such thing as like a status quo outside of do a thing that makes you useful to society and don't murder people, and then just keep living. We live in a world where you can do just about anything professionally and succeed enough to be societally accepted for it. So you are left with a large gray area of, okay, well, you've got all this free time, what do? Do you throw it away? Or do you invest it into yourself? Or do you invest it into something else entirely? Do you try and manifest a version of yourself that is external from yourself? And that usually ends up being people manifesting their versions of themselves as their children, or some strange, abstracted version of reality where they're trying to escape from themselves. That is not what I'm trying to get at. I'm trying to get to a point where you could make more or less a version of existence where you are able to exist alongside your ideals, and they manifest themselves rather than you having what you wanted expressed differently by other people. Because I don't want to be like another Marx, and where you've got neo-Marxism, which is a complete bastardization of what Karl Marx actually tried to stand for. If he were to see what Marxism is today, he'd be spinning in his grave. But I want my ideals to be fully articulated at some point in time, and I don't feel I'm at that point yet. And I feel that the way that I get to that point is by continuing to take notes, continuing to be observant, and continuing to try and improve myself. And then you ask yourself, well, how? How do you improve yourself? It's a deeply, almost philosophical question, because, well, what do? You either climb the social hierarchy, you climb the business hierarchy, you climb a physical ladder, you try and become a physical representation of your moralistic ideologies, or you end up becoming, well, it doesn't have to be an or, does it? Why can't we just be all of these things simultaneously? Be like a quote-unquote philanthropist. Uh, 1 second, I'm gonna grab some coffee. Alright, this can now serve as a counterpoint or an anchor point. Oh. This can now serve as an anchoring point for difference between pre and post social self. As I was briefly social for, I was not verbally social before this half of the speech, and now I have been. Although it's a question of, does your pre-social self get affected and become quote-unquote social by engaging socially with somebody over the computer or phone or whatever, or if you have to do it verbally, like does text count as a immersion into the social self? That's an interesting question, I believe. What was I saying before this? Ideologies. My version of reality. The dream, I tried to explain the dream very briefly. I don't know that I've really even fully articulated what the dream was. Okay, it was like I was time traveling, and the answer to time travel was that I was my own father, and I had to wake myself up by fully articulating my brain scan so that I may be able to imagine that you wake up, and the way that you're waking up is by being printed into existence, and the first things that you're able to see are the neurons in your brain being quartered, or not quartered, but brought, what would be the opposite of quartered? Like put together in a series of fourths. Anyway, let's step after cubed to the fourth power. Anyway, I have long since tried to establish different chemicals as being different modifiers on the human brain, and I would like to continue this sort of experimentation at some point in the future. I believe that different chemicals have modulating effect on the brain, in that you could tune the brain in a manner similar to that of a radio. If you got the amplitude from one version, one chemical, and then you got the modulation from another. As say, the modulars are going to be things that are what are considered psychoactive chemicals. And then, not really quite sure where you're going to get, whether you would be able to establish an amplitude or a frequency. But if those are the ways that you modify or modulate the, well, I guess by default you would say it's a frequency that you'd be modulating. This was originally called wavelength theory, or what I was working on was going to be being called wavelength theory, right? Which was a theory that if you're able to properly harness these chemicals, you would be able to create a wavelength that humankind would be able to use to fully express themselves in a way that they hadn't before, or in a way that they haven't in thousands of years at least. Being able to be on the same wavelength with somebody else, as it were, as you can have conversations with people of a varying depth depending on your state of agreement or agreeableness, perhaps, rather than there's a certain je ne sais quoi where you can end up becoming so familiarized with a person that you can more or less understand what they're trying to say without them even saying it, and express themselves in a way where you can know what they're trying to say better than they can. and you are able to articulate their thoughts better than they are, but you still understand one another. That entire thing is what I'm trying to encapsulate, that entire phenomenon. And in so doing, I hope that, I don't really know what I hope, but I think that if this theory that I've been working on can be true, or is true, and it was briefly informed of something known as empathic, what's it called? Empathy, one second. Something known as empathetic reactivity, where a person can be too empathetic. This then, therefore, means that empathy is a real thing. If it is a real thing, if it's a phenomenon that exists, it's something that can be measured scientifically. If we can get a scientific measuring of these types of things, we can then further our understanding of the human brain, further our understanding of the psyche, further our understanding of humanity as it exists currently, and potentially end up furthering all of humanity. Because if we can, say, communicate faster than we currently do through a method of communication that, say, you'd be able to link two brains and they would be able to communicate without needing to speak. If you could just think and the other person could hear what you're thinking, perhaps. Or if you were just able to communicate by saying, like, one word, and you were able to then express an entire paragraph's worth of thoughts. That's what I'm aiming for. If we could get that, then we would... time as we know it would become infinitely more useful to people that are researching. People that are in the process of needing to communicate things efficiently would then be able to do so more fluently, and research as we know it would multiplicatively resonate. You would have people able to... I feel if this were a possibility, then people... If this is a possibility, which I believe it is, then people would be able to advance. Like humanity as a whole will be able to advance faster than it has been for... And it's been advancing pretty fast. But, like, we need more reasons to advance faster than our bodies, right? Our brains are already thousands of times faster than our bodies are. But regardless, currently the human reaction time is 3/4 of a second, approximately. I believe that there is a way to increase it by at least 1/4, or rather, sort of bullet time. You would have 4 times as much time to perceive what you're trying to perceive. I believe that this is a possibility for all humans. This sounds like the ramblings of a madman. I don't know that I will further elucidate on this ever again, honestly. This is just kind of a... I wanted to get this out in a way that I could then further elaborate on it for myself rather than for other people. So... I don't really know what else to say. I would like to finish this book that I'm reading, and maybe someday write my own on this theory. Well, I guess I could just write the thesis. I haven't even sipped my coffee yet. Anyway, I hope I and you and everyone has a fantastic day.